The spirit or character is the originator of form. The astral forces of nature are the architects, and the physical plane of nature furnishes the material to render the form substantial and to enable it to come into contact with the physical plane. Thought is the great power by which forms are called into existence. The thoughts of a person during life determine the tendencies of his soul while in the subjective state, and these tendencies attract other influences and bring him again into contact with form. An entity attracted by the illusion of self may fancy itself to be something distinct and isolated from the universal life, and look upon all other existences as being distinct from the whole. From this illusion arise innumerable other illusions. From the sense of self arises the love of self, the desire for the continuance of personality, giving rise to greed, avarice, envy, jealousy, fear, doubt and sorrow, pain and death, and to the whole range of emotions and sufferings which frequently render life miserable and afford no permanent happiness. A person who lives in a state of isolation on the emotional plane will care for nothing else but for his own personality. He concentrates all his energies into himself and becomes more and more insignificant and spiritually small. Gradually he will sink to lower planes of thought, becoming, so to say, more and more heavy as his soul becomes dense. And if once the downward impulse is given and not arrested, he will sink lower and lower until his personality at the death of the form disappears in the vortex and he ceases to exist as a man in human form, having already during life ceased to exist as a man in a human character. When his physical body is decayed and the magnetic body dispersed, the remnant of his soul elements may still continue to exist. Its movements will be guided by its controlling emotions. It will not go whither it chooses, for having no intelligence it can make no choice. But it will go whither it is attracted by its instincts, until its energies are exhausted and it ceases to exist as a form. Thus the animal elements of a man who was during his life a great drunkard may after his death be attracted to another living drunkard and be drawn to a grog shop. Those of a lewd person seek comfort in a brothel, those of an avaricious person stand guard over his buried treasures, etc., etc. And all such remnants may have a certain amount of consciousness and memory left and may be galvanized back temporarily into a living state by coming in contact with a medium. Thus, endless varieties of spooks, ghosts, vampires, incubi, succubi, etc. may come into existence, and there are innumerable accounts given in books on magic, occultism, and spiritualism to illustrate such facts. As on the physical plane, so on the astral plane, isolation produces starvation. An emotion to be kept alive must be fed by corresponding emotions, else it will devour its possessor. A person who loves another person or object intensely and cannot gain the object of his desire must transfer his love upon some other object, or he may perish in the attempt to suppress it. If the love is transferred to a higher ideal, it will render man happy. If it is transferred to a lower one, dissatisfaction may be the result. Stored up anger will find some object upon which to spend its fury, else it may produce an explosion destructive to its possessor. Tranquility follows a storm. The black magician who attempts to kill or injure another person by the intensity of his hatred projected towards that person may be killed or injured by the intensity of the force he has created, and which, if it is not sufficiently strong to effect his object, will react upon himself. Accumulated energy cannot be annihilated. It must be transferred to other forms or be transformed into other modes of motion. It cannot remain forever inactive and yet continue to exist. It is useless to attempt to resist a passion which we cannot control. If its accumulating energy is not led into other channels, it will grow until it becomes stronger than will and stronger than reason. To control it, it should be led into another and higher channel. Thus, a love for something vulgar may be changed by turning it into a love for something high, and vice may be turned into virtue by changing its aim. Passion is blind, it goes where it is led to, and reason is a safer guide for it than the instinct. Love for a form disappears with the death of the form or soon after. Love of character remains even after the form in which that character was embodied ceased to exist. The ancients said that nature suffers no vacuum. We cannot destroy or annihilate a passion. If it is driven away, another elemental influence will take its place. We should therefore not attempt to destroy the low without putting something in its place, but we should displace the low by the high, vice by virtue, and superstition by knowledge. There are some persons who live in perfect isolation on the intellectual plane. They are such whose thoughts are entirely absorbed by intellectual labors, having no time or inclination to attend to the claims of their spirit. They are, so to say, living continually in the cupola of their temples, the head, while their hearts are made to starve and become petrified. They concentrate all their intellectual forces into their brains and may become very learned in regard to the small details of life on this planet. But while they concentrate their attention upon the small, they often lose their capacity to enter into harmony with the whole. Seen from the standpoint of eternal truth, they are lunatics, living in the moonshine of their own imagination, dawdling away their life among the realm of illusions and perishing form, and neglecting that which alone is lasting and permanent. They constitute, to a great extent, the materialists, skeptics, and rationalists of our age. They throw away their birthright to immortality by arguing themselves into a belief in its impossibility. They may become criminals for the sake of science, disregarding the laws of humanity. Their astral corpses will continue to exist for a while after the death of their physical forms, until the intellectual power active therein is exhausted. But their spiritual aspirations having already deserted them during their life, there will be nothing left of them in the end to survive the dissolution of the soul. All forms that nature produces are the products of universal life expressing itself in forms. They are manifestations of the One in Three, but as such they do not possess any life of their own. There still remains the unmanifested One, which must become active in the form if the form is to live. The Three rendered alive through the One produces the Four, and Four is therefore the number of perfection. Life is universally present in nature. It is contained in every particle of matter, and only when the last particle of life is departed from a form, the form ceases to exist. It may remain for centuries inactive in a form, but when it begins to manifest itself, motion appears in the form. And the higher the form is developed, the higher may be the activity of its life. Life in a stone does not appear to exist, and yet without life there would be no cohesion of its atoms. If the life principle were extracted from a mineral, its form would be annihilated. A seed taken from the tomb of an Egyptian mummy began to germinate and grow after it was planted in the earth, having kept its life principle during a sleep of many centuries. If the activity of animal life could be correspondingly arrested, an animal or a man might prolong individual existence to an indefinite period. Stones may live from the beginning of a manvantara unto its end. Some forms reach a very old age, but if the life impulse is once given, it is difficult, if not impossible, to arrest it. Life may be transferred from one form upon another, and the power by which it may be transferred is the power of love, because love, will, and life are essentially the same power, or different aspects of one, in the same sense as heat and light are modifications of motion. The power of hate may kill, and the power of love has been known to call the apparently dead back to life. Love is a restoration of life and health, more powerful than all the drugs of the pharmacopoeia, and it is the universal panacea which the true physician applies. Thus the Son is continually transferring his life, his will, and his love to this globe without losing anything thereby. There is no actual loss, but merely a setting in motion of vibrations of life and light in the body of our planet by the central will fire at the center of our system, the Sun. There are thousands of people sick because the sun in them is grown cold. They cannot make up their minds to be well. they cannot form that firm resolution which is necessary to set the will at their own center into motion, so that its vibrations would induce life and health in all parts of their system. Their disease is infidelity. They are full of doubt, uncertain whether they ought to live or to die, and while we bemoan their miserable condition, they have neither the courage nor the will to be well, and instead of curing themselves, they hire a doctor to amuse them and to enable them to remain sick. Every disease, without any exception, is in the first instance caused directly or indirectly by a weak or perverted will or a disordered imagination. Nor could it be otherwise, because man himself and the world wherein he lives is a product of will and imagination, and there is nothing else but these two factors to act upon. The more external the disease or the accident is, the more remote is it from these original causes. But even an external accident is due to a disharmony existing between the will of subject and object, either consciously or unconsciously expressed. The origin of the majority of internal diseases can be traced to some emotion of the will or to some inharmonious thought, to some irregular desire or some state of the mind, conceived either by the patient himself or impressed upon him by another.
While the infinite self-consciousness resident in that energy, providing the motive force of will to bring a portion of that energy into motion to create reality, corresponds with the sun. This is so because in order to attain self-consciousness, the consciousness of the Absolute must project a hologram of itself and then perceive it. That hologram is a mirror image of the Absolute in infinity. Still exists outside time and space, but is one step removed from the Absolute and is the actual agent of all creation, of all reality.